Thanks for tuning in. This is Agriculture Today. And peering ahead to the row crop planting season, just a couple of months over the horizon now, some thoughts for you soybean growers on the merits of having your soybean seed treated with a fungicide ahead of planting time. With us once more, Doug Jardine, row crop disease specialist, K-State Research and Extension. During the season, Doug, we often refer back to whether a producer had a seed treatment applied on their soybeans before they sowed that crop, and the worthiness of that. It has to do with the diseases that might be pressuring the crop, right?
Right. And just kind of a couple of things about this, Eric. In corn and grain sorghum, this is not a discussion because all of the seed comes pre-treated from the manufacturer. Depending on which seed company and what chemical company owns them these days, depends on what you're going to get. The good news is that in most of our evaluations, they all work pretty equally well. However, soybeans and wheat historically have not been that way. They've never come pre-treated because back in the old days, we typically saved our seed from year to year. And so if we wanted a treatment, we'd have to put it on ourselves or take it to a seed conditioner. But anyways, the industry got in the habit of not treating the seed. And there was some movement maybe a few years ago to have the seed come pre-treated like corn and sorghum does. But there was pushback from a number of different places. And so they continue to be left really up to the producers as to whether they want them or not. Whether you need them, is a good question. As I look to data from other states, oftentimes they show not much of a benefit from the seed treatment. But we've been doing seed treatment here in Kansas since the late 1980s. And as we look particularly at soybeans, will we get a stand improvement or yield improvement every year? Well, the answer is no. But if we play the averages, it's probably a pretty good idea. We've been keeping a 7-year rolling average, and that rolling average is about 2.5 bushels yield increase at the end of the year. So, depending on the price of soybeans, that might be $25 in gross profit at the end of the year for something that may cost you $5 or $10. So we're talking, maybe a 2-to-1 return on investment. And I think most bankers would say it's a pretty good idea.
You might think of it as an insurance policy against potential disease threats then.
Right, because the thing is, as much as we like to think we can't predict the weather. And, if we're in an extended period of dry, warm weather with excellent germinating conditions in the soil, no, we probably don't need the seed treatment. But it could take just a 1-inch rain that we weren't expecting, and if you don't have your seed protected, then you have an issue, and then you may be out there replanting. And that, tends to cost more money, and especially with the price of seed these days. And that's actually another factor as we've gone to the high-tech seed, and costs significantly more than in the old days when we used to save it from season to season. It was basically back then the price of a bushel of seed. Now it's many times more that. And so, as you indicated, some growers have gone to using that as a means of insurance.
Well, Doug, then, as you think back over the last 2 or 3 production years and the diseases which have interfered with our soybean production here in Kansas, what diseases should one plan against as they think about selecting a treatment?
Right. Well, that's a good question, and the answer to that is partially when is it that you're going to plant your soybeans. Here in Kansas, honestly, we have 2 main pathogens that affect us as a seedling blight in soybeans. They would be different fungi in the species Pythium, and then different fungi in the species Rhizoctonia. And so we might talk about Pythium seedling blight or Rhizoctonia seedling blight. In other parts of the country, maybe in Ohio, Phytophthora root rot becomes an important issue for them as a seedling blight. And then we do get scattered references to Fusarium root rot. That one's a little harder to track down. To me, in Kansas, that's more of a later season root rot, but in other states it may be earlier. But Pythium and Rhizoctonia are what we're most concerned about. And Pythium historically has been a disease that we have associated with cooler, wetter weather. And so for those who plant early, that would be the disease of concern. Rhizoctonia has historically been associated with warmer, wetter soils, so people are planting later in seasons when we're getting a lot of rain, although the soils are warm, tend to have Rhizoctonia problems. Now, having said that, and I kind of use the word traditionally, Kansas was part of a research project about 5 years ago where we made a widespread collection of Pythium seedling infested plants from really across the United States. And then we identified the different species of Pythium, because keep in mind that Pythium, when we talk about, it's a genus or a large group, but I think we've identified 16 different Pythiums that occur in Kansas soybean fields, specific species. And some are more aggressive than others. But what we found from this research project is that the Pythium species are sort of stratified. And so there's a group of Pythium species that tend to predominate in the northernmost latitudes in North Dakota and Minnesota and Wisconsin and Michigan. And then there was a second group that tended to predominate basically down the I-80 corridor. So think Nebraska and Iowa, Illinois, Ohio. And then there was a third group that was more of a southern group, and these would be Kansas, southern Missouri, Arkansas, maybe into Tennessee. And that stratification by latitude suggests, at least to me, that temperature is less important than we thought. That we have here in Kansas, we have species of Pythium. It doesn't have to be quite so cold for them to be active. So that's kind of changed our mind a little bit on how we make recommendations, but the key factor is always that it's being wet.
So you've Pythia, Rhizoctonia. How does one practically match up a particular seed treatment as they're shopping for products?
Well, we've been testing these for many years, and we actually have a publication. Right now, it's currently being housed out of Purdue University, but here at Kansas State on our Extension Plant Pathology page, we have a direct link to that publication so people can easily access it through K-State Extension Plant Pathology. It is currently being revised, and it's going to move to a site called the Crop Protection Network. Growers can go to that. It's cropprotectionnetwork.org. But even if you don't go there, we will still have it on our K-State Extension page with a direct link to the new publication. And in that publication, we list the different active ingredients that are available. And as growers take a look down that, they'll find that there are certain products. For instance, if we're talking about Pythium, there's 2 or 3 products, metalaxyl, mefenoxam, and ethoboxam, that are rated excellent against those. If we're looking at Rhizoctonia, there's products like fluoroperoxad, chlorinab, sedaxane are all highly rated for Rhizoctonia root rot. So knowing that, then producers can go to the commercial products and see which commercial product contained those products. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of these products have done equally well in our trials, so I'm just going to use a few as examples. There's a product called Acceleron that contains fluoroperoxad and metalaxyl, and then also the active ingredient from headline fungicide. And so you've kind of got a 3-way cocktail to protect that. Another company has a product called Evergol Energy. It has metalaxyl and penfluflin and prothioconazole. Again, kind of another cocktail of products there that gives you that broad spectrum control. And then there's some newer products. There's one called Vibrance that has sedaxane that is specific for Rhizoctonia control. And so there's lots of products, and we've talked earlier about Ilevo, which is fluopyram, which is applied as a seed treatment, but specifically for sudden death syndrome control. So although sudden death isn't a seedling blight per se, we apply it as a seed treatment for later protection. So as they're working with their seed conditioners or the companies that they buy seed from, then they can kind of select these products that they're going to want to have added. I think if you buy pre-treated from the company, you're going to get whatever package they sell. If you are buying untreated seed and you take it to a local conditioner to have it applied, you may be able to pick and choose among products a little bit more and tailor it to your specific needs. And then also, we don't have really time to get into this today, but they have insecticides and nematicides and plant growth regulators that can all be added to the seed. So the companies are getting, so they're packing more and more things around that tiny little seed. And the question always is, how much can you put on and still get it through the planter? I don't think we've reached that point yet, but it's a very efficient way to deliver product. Rather than broadcasting it across the field, you're putting it specifically where you want it. And so that's, really a good thing.
With these resources out there, point being that producers ought to take advantage of them and study up on the product performance before they pull the trigger with an investment of this type.
Right. We've had some kind of general recommendations over the years, and it was definitely if you plant before May 15th, just do it. Right. Don't even guess. If you are a no-tiller or a reduced tiller, probably through the end of May. Historically, we've not necessarily seen a lot of results from June planted or double crop planted soybeans. But the insecticide that's on there may give you some benefit in those later planted crops. And again, with the high price of seed, We're talking relatively few dollars on a per acre basis, and so you might even want to consider it on every bean that goes in the ground. But, the earlier plant, definitely long run, the more bang for the buck.
Well, once again, take advantage of this information. The Crop Protection Network website will have the updated version of seed treatment performance for soybeans, but if you'd like to see what's out there right now, do go to the plant pathology website at K-State, plantpath.ksu.edu. Do your homework, producers, as you consider the benefits of seed treatments, protecting soybeans from those seedling blights that might take hold. Doug, we'll be soon into the growing season, so we'll have you back very shortly.
I'm guessing in about a month there's going to be some corn growing in the ground in southeast Kansas.
Indeed. Appreciate your time.
You're welcome.
Doug Jardine, row crop disease specialist, K-State Research and Extension, on this Agriculture Today.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today. Along with us once again, an agricultural engineer from Kansas State University, and he returns to share what should be known on the part of agricultural producers about a regulation that went into effect this past summer and what it means to farmers and ranchers out there. It's called the Agricultural Machinery Illumination and Safety Act. Ed Brokesh is here to not only tell us what that new regulation was all about, but what it suggests to producers out there as they operate their machinery on our roadways, highways around Kansas and elsewhere. So the background on how this act came together. Ed, if you would.
Well, the reason this act came together is because of, first off, road safety. This act was a long time in making, and it's based on some ag equipment standards that date actually back to the 50s. As you can remember, in the early 60s, those of us that have been around a few years can remember the SMV sign coming along.
Vehicles. Yep.
And then from there, we've added more lights and such as time's gone by. And the whole purpose is so that when you have those busy harvest days and the light's not so good, that, those people coming from the cities can see us farmers out there on the road and not run into us. That's the basic reason for having the Illumination and Safety Act. That's the base of it. But the reality of it is what was happening was that there are multiple states across the United States that were considering writing their own laws regarding marking and illumination of ag equipment. And the machinery companies recognized this was going to be a real problem for them, and it was going to cost them money, and ultimately it would cost the farmers money in a couple of different ways. One, in the cost of different, more expensive machines, and two, in the case that when those machines came on the market, they would not be able to be marketed in every state. If you had Kansas and Nebraska with different marking laws, then a piece of Nebraska equipment probably wouldn't be a good buy for a Kansas producer, or likewise a Kansas producer selling a piece of equipment to someone in Nebraska probably could not get a decent value for that piece of used equipment. EMISA law, Ag Machinery and Illumination and Safety Act, supersedes any state law that may come down the pike and prevents any of this problem. Mm-hmm. One of the other things to think about on this law is that a lot of farmers farm across state lines, and without this law, then a farmer crossing the state line could be in violation of law. Again, using the Kansas-Nebraska relationship, if you're there on the border in Jewell County and you were farming on both sides of that border, you could find yourself in violation of one law or the other.
So there was a bit of standardization going on here, it sounds.
Correct.
To what equipment does this apply, though, in terms of the age of that equipment?
The law is written such that it really only affects equipment made after June 22nd, made and sold after June 22nd, 2017.
Okay, it's new equipment then.
If you've got your favorite old 4020 and you want to pull your favorite old trailer from the early 60s down the road, you're certainly welcome to do so, and you're not going to violate any rules. Now, I will say if you're going to do a lot of that, you probably better go and mark it and light it properly. But as far as violating this law, you're not going to be doing that.
So newer equipment is already fairly well outfitted with the illumination markings and the lighting that will meet the standard?
Yes. The standard, the ASABE standard S279, which this law is based on, was written by the equipment companies. The AGCO, John Deere, CNH, Kubota all sit around a table and they agree to how these pieces of equipment should be marked and lighted, and that's why the standard comes into existence. What has simply happened now is we have written this standard into federal code so that it is required of people to use this S279 ASABE standard to light and mark their equipment.
So, Ed, as you look at it, how does it really impact producers out there? It sounds as if it would be rather minimal. Are there specific instances where producers need to be a bit heads up on this?
Yeah, there are a couple. In general, producers will never notice this. The equipment that they are buying today, if you go to the John Deere dealership and you buy a brand new tractor, it's going to be properly lighted and marked. So for the most part, you're not going to notice it. There are a couple instances where I think you do need to pay attention to it. One, if you're a do-it-yourselfer and you like to build your own pieces of equipment, and there's a few farmers out there that are very capable of making some really good quality equipment that will find its way onto the road, they need to pay attention to it. Certainly, FFA students are often building equipment, and they need to pay attention to it. And agriculture has always had a history of little businesses getting started in small towns, and some of these businesses, as they get started, need to be paying attention. And so as a producer, if you bought equipment from Joe's welding shop down the way that's about to become the next major corporation, you may want to pay attention to this standard because of that.
There is a term for implement movement called the implement train, if you will. And would this affect those in any way?
Yes, it would. The implement train is when you take multiple pieces of equipment and hook them together. And these, as most farmers are quite aware, that if you put a tractor and a disc and a harrow and then maybe a anhydrous nurse tank behind that, you've got quite a long train that can go down the road. Now, individually, each one of these pieces is probably marked properly for the EMISA lighting and marking standard. But you put them together in this long train going down the highway, they probably are not. And so you could be in violation of this law by doing that. Plus, it's going to be difficult for people coming up on the side of one of those trains to recognize it, and there is a safety hazard related to it.
So are there any materials out there, any printed information, any guides of any sort that have been put together that producers can use to assure that they are in compliance?
Yes, it's in the works right now. As obviously, the law has just gone into effect, and providing information is in the works. The Association of Equipment Manufacturers is working on a guide that will eventually be written into the ASABE standard, and there's work being done to make these guides available at minimal cost, if not free of charge. We're still working on that, and we'll know more in the next few months how these things will be available. But the guides will be available. They will be easy pictorial guides that a do-it-yourselfer can go and get this guide and take a look at it and have a pretty good understanding of how they should put marking on a piece of equipment they may be building themselves.
So be looking for that information as it comes out. Now, you are well versed in this whole topic, Ed, for you're actually on the committee that put together the standards. Is that correct?
Correct. I started as chair of the committee this past July, so I'm intimately aware of what's happening as we add these pictorial guides and to the standard, as well as we go forward to improve the standard as new technology comes out. that's one of the cool things about the MISA law is it's written such that as the lighting and marking technology improves for ag equipment, the law will automatically be updated as the standard is updated.
Just a couple of quick items here that you say come to your attention every once in a while. Questions about lighting, illumination, slow-moving vehicle signs, for instance, which are an older mechanism of illumination. Does a lawn tractor need an SMV, or does it need to adhere to these standards whatsoever?
The lawn tractor, the lawn equipment, is not required to meet the new MISA law. That's considered to be a personal piece of equipment, and it's not likely that it will ever see the roadway.
And likewise, you will see SMVs, particularly the older signs, used in an alternative way as a driveway marker. You'd like to shy folks away from that.
Yes, that's one of my pet peeves is there's an amazing number of gates and driveways out there that must be considered as slow-moving vehicles, and that's not a thing to do. And it's really not very safe. If you're driving down the road at night and you're pop over a hill and all of a sudden you see an SMV sign right there blazing away at you, and they are quite bright, you may suddenly take evasive action thinking that you're about to come upon some piece of slow-moving equipment, and you might find yourself in the ditch trying to avoid that piece of equipment. So it would be great if people would quit using these things for gates and driveway markers. It's not what they're intended for, and it can cause problems for people.
So use them as intended. But again, this act is now law in place, the regulations. Agricultural Machinery Illumination and Safety Act was put into effect June of 2017. If you have any questions, again, the Association of Equipment Manufacturers putting together a guide. There will be information channeled through that local extension office, likewise in the near future. Ed, we appreciate your time as always. Thanks for coming over.
Thanks for having me.
Agricultural engineer Ed Brokesh, Kansas State University, has been our guest on this segment of Agriculture Today. When we come back, and once again we'll hear from K-State wildlife specialist Charlie Lee. All still to come here on the K-State Radio Network.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128 plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Agriculture Today is back now, and once more with us is wildlife specialist, K-State Research and Extension, Charlie Lee. Well, Charlie, this point of the winter season, it might be an opportunity for farm pond owners to take a look at those ponds that have had the tendency to leak over time. And why would one want to consider this at this point?
Well, this is the time of year when typically pond levels are the lowest. With the severe weather that we've had, lots of ice, a little bit of snow, which discolors the ice, shades it, results in lots of fish kills, particularly in those ponds that are not very deep. When we have ice for a long period of time, the fish are going to die, and that may be a time with low water or no water, no fish. It may be a time to renovate some of those ponds that get adequate runoff but leak too much to be a good permanent pond. Typically, the common causes for pond leaking are the pond is built in the wrong location. Sometimes the pond wasn't constructed appropriately, but most of the time it's a consideration of soils that have a high sand or gravel content, or perhaps thin layers of soil with fractured or layer rock that leaks.
So one needs to figure out the actual cause of that leak before they move any further?
Well, yes, that's correct, in that if you don't know the cause of the leak, it's going to be very difficult to try to correct it. So the first step is to kind of carefully examine the pond, the dam and the levee, look for seeps or wet spots below the dam, or downstream a short distance. Get some history. Does the water level drop rapidly and then stay at a certain level and slowly deplete the rest of the way out? Was the site properly prepared by removing existing vegetation? Was there a core trench put in or a keyway trench so that it's going to stop this downward movement of water as it goes down the watershed? But I think what I see most often is that the pond dam is usually constructed appropriately, but the pond bottom oftentimes was not. And when we look at causes, what I see quite often is that the pond bottom wasn't adequately compacted. Most of the time, the contractor has done a good job and has selected a site that probably has adequate soils, but perhaps those soils are thin, and then the pond bottom just wasn't compacted sufficiently. Many think that you can run over that area with a bulldozer. Bulldozers have very low ground pressure, so they're not very good at compacting soil. I think many of these farm ponds that leak can be fixed by compacting that soil with a sheep's foot packer. They have the tines that have a very small surface area that compacts the soil and then a space, but going over the pond bottom several times with those is certainly going to compact that soil. And if you have enough clay in the existing soil, that oftentimes is going to fix it. An advantage of the sheep foot packers is they come in all sizes or widths, so it doesn't take a giant tractor in order to pull those. You can just get one that's a little narrower, and it takes a little bit longer to compact the pond bottom.
But if compaction won't get it done, sealing the pond may be in order here, you say?
Well, there's lots of ways to try to seal the pond, and one of them is to just add clay. If you don't have a good enough clay in the bottom, perhaps you can get existing clay from nearby and put a blanket of clay over the bottom. I encourage people, if they go that route, to disc up the pond bottom and try to incorporate that clay blanket back into that soil, and then make sure that they put that in there in layers with compacting that each time. Other times, folks like to use a clay product called bentonite. Sodium bentonite is a highly plastic clay that expands over 10 times in volume when it's wet. That's been used to try to seal ponds. Sometimes people like to just put that on the surface of the water and let it settle to the bottom. Occasionally that works, but rarely. Most of the time, if you're going to use bentonite, get the pond dry, incorporate the bentonite at least 2 pounds per square foot into the pond bottom. Mix that with the first few inches of soil in the pond bottom, and then compact that back in as well.
Now, one other alternative that folks could at least consider would be using a liner to seal that pond.
Liners are almost 100% effective in stopping seepage, but I've found lots of problems with liners, and that some things dig through the liners. They're subject to being punctured. They're not very attractive if you don't use some riprap around the top where the liner is attached to the edges of the pond at high water level. And then they don't account for groundwater seeping into the pond. Sometimes you get liners that will bubble to the surface. So there's several options out there, but many of them are going to be expensive. And if you're going to seal a pond, I think the best approach is to do it this time of year when the pond is dry. Get back in there with some dirt-moving equipment and make sure you include compaction.
And because of the expense, that brings it back around to the importance of preventing leakage in the first place by good pond construction and siting.
Yeah, but that pond siting is very important. Talk to your people that have some experience building ponds in the local area. Do some good soil survey work and try to prevent these problems because they're fairly difficult and expensive to fix.
Well, there are some thoughts on renovating leaking farm ponds, and this might be a point of the year to take a look at accomplishing that project, but be aware of the expenses involved. And Charlie, thanks for the word right here. Wildlife Specialist, K-State Research and Extension, that's Charlie Lee. closing out our Tuesday edition. Before we go, we want you to remember once again that you can listen to Agriculture Today now via podcast, if that's an option that suits you. Each day's program now available in podcast form, and to subscribe to that for automatic downloading on your desktop or mobile device, go to the instructions on our website, ksre.ksu.edu/news. Click on the Radio Network tab to the left there, and then on the Agriculture Today link to follow. Again, that's at ksre.ksu.edu/news. We'll be right back here tomorrow. Hope you will as well. Until then, Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.